Welcome, folks. Good morning. Welcome to Resilience at Work, what you need to know before returning to the workplace. My name is Dr. Eliyahu Lotzar from Reframed Reality, where we help teams build synergies and advance adaptability in organizational cultures. With me today, also Karen Johnson of Trauma Informed Lens Consulting, fairly self-explanatory there, and James Radack of mental health first aid training. He helped develop the training, actually. So I want to point out, of course, that while we're talking about the effects of the shift in workplace, and the shift in workplace happened because of COVID-19, and it happened all of a sudden, and the all of a suddenness is what allows us to talk about trauma. Still, nevertheless, it's also important to note that today's Juneteenth, as you see at the bottom of the screen there, and I'm assuming that you know what it is, and it wraps together importantly with us white folk finally coming to terms with, beginning to come to terms with institutional, or maybe I should say institutional bias, systemic racism, and the issues there. Now, obviously, hundreds of years of slavery is not something you can compare to even a momentary pandemic. But the point of the whole thing is that we're looking at situations where trauma comes up. And in the workplace, we have a tradition of just stick with business. But employees are humans. And we're all, not just employees, we're all employees, right? So we're all subject to the stresses and strains of traumatic situations. And a trauma is anything that is notably different all of a sudden from our baseline. Karen could probably correct me a little bit on that, but the point is that what is trauma to one is not necessarily trauma to another, and this is a moment where our baseline has been shifted dramatically. And so things are going on in people's heads in the organization, and that's why we're talking about the mental emotional side of things, not other people are talking about the practical aspects. So just to put a fine point on the mental emotional stresses and strains, I'm going to show you here the US Census Pulse Survey, the latest one that I found for the Washington, D.C. area. Now, basically what you see here is that about more than half the people are anxious, like well more than half the people. Little more than half people are worried and or can't stop the worry. Some people actually go into losing interest in what they're doing because it's just so hard to focus for some people. And even, this is the only one that's a little less than half, people enter feeling down, depressed, or even hopeless. Now, this, you should know, is of course of anyone who's in a household. This survey is of people who are in a household where somebody in the household lost their job, starting from when the pandemic started. So not everyone is directly in the household, but some people have friends or family. Almost a lot of us, just judging by the numbers, the millions of people in the Washington, D.C. area who are affected, most of us know somebody. And someplace that affects us as employees in that we have to be wondering, wait a minute, as they call us back to the workplace, which they haven't yet, and they haven't said, how's it going to happen exactly? What date are we coming back? Who's coming back? In what order? Am I going to be needed in the workplace? Are we even going to have a workplace anymore? And if I'm online and I'm not connecting on a daily basis, seeing humans, touching humans, feeling, having these little side chats that are spontaneous, doing all the human interaction things that people do, what's going to be with me? Am I good enough? Because now, all that's going to be asked of me is outcomes. It's strictly outcomes. So these are some of the things that are going through employees' minds, as you know. And so we're going to present this as one aspect of trauma, or one expression, I should say, sorry, one expression of trauma. So just to sum up this, it's not just this current week that it's like that. The numbers have been fluctuating back and forth, but roughly half of the people in the survey are not doing well by their own self-expression. And then, of course, there are many people who take a survey and think that they're doing okay, but all of a sudden find out later, oops, I'm having symptoms. So these are some of the things that people carry to work and that we're going to deal with. This is the background. So what we're going to talk about is in 3 parts. Karen Johnson is going to describe what a trauma-informed lens is, what goes into it. I'll be describing a process for engaging the staff. And when I say engaging the staff, I'm assuming that some of you are executives, some of you are HR leaders, some of you are managers, and I'll be talking that way. And so the point is care for self and especially care for others. And then James Radack will be going into detail about languaging when talking to employees, what to look for, what in detail might be going through their heads, and how to help staff be resilient. So this is, I just want to point out that this whole moment is not just for, it's not just for taking care of things and getting things back to normal. This is actually a moment where we can utilize the change in what we do, in how we approach employees and what we think of in our new policy making, because there are new policies being made all the time, new processes being instituted. So where we can increase employee engagement. And so this is actually a genuine moment of hope and opportunity. It's not just, oh, let's figure out how we can get by. Okay. And then we'll have questions and answers at the end. So if you would, Karen, talk to us about trauma-informed lens.
Yes, thank you, Eliyahu. Thank you so much for that very helpful introduction and framing of this topic. It's a pleasure for me to join you today. Thank you for joining us on this Juneteenth. So these are, I mean, the term unprecedented times is referenced a lot these days, but it's quite true, and Eliyahu has definitely laid that out. It's important to note that before March, however, we were struggling in the workforce with many challenges, including increased burnout, high turnover, complex work that required long hours and very little chance for work-life balance, and as represented in the bottom right photo, the impact of challenging events in the lives of many workers. Adverse Child's Experiences is a seminal research study that came out of Kaiser Permanente and the CDC in the late 1990s, and it highlights the strong correlation between bad things happening in childhood and negative health outcomes in adulthood. This large body of research and science that has grown out of the original study over the past 20 years helps us understand that we are all impacted by the events in our lives, and this impact is definitely brought into the work setting. So we consider, when we're looking at our workforce, we need to consider what's happened in an individual's life and how they're impacted. And then, of course, we are now grappling with the challenges of a new plague, which has changed your work in countless ways, and we're continuing to confront a more familiar age-old scourge, as Eliyahu noted, pervasive and systemic racism. So there's been a lot going on in the last few months, and perhaps especially with our Black and Brown colleagues. So we are seeing, as you noted on our news feeds, violence, chaos, unrest that this country has not seen in decades, on top of adapting to this virus that has taken over 117,000 lives, left 40 million unemployed, and disproportionately impacted communities of color. So I think, and Eliyahu's information at the beginning was very helpful, but I think we can assume, and we have to be careful about assumptions, and individuals are affected in their own way, but we can assume most of our employees are distracted, overwhelmed, and challenged to engage in their daily work. And thus, it's really important for us as HR managers and leaders to learn how to hold space for our teams in these times of such turmoil. So this morning, I want to take a moment to talk about stress, distress, and trauma, its impact, and share a few ideas about what we can do about it. So stress is merely a demand on one or more of our body's many systems. So hunger, thirst, cold, a good workout, a big project at work. These are all stressors. These stress is essential to our healthy development. It helps to build resilience, and we don't need to be afraid of it. The key factor in determining whether stress is positive or destructive is if it is predictable, moderate, and controllable. So as noted on the left side of the chart, when stress is moderate or mild, short-lived and controllable, it can be positive and leads to resilience. When stress is more prolonged and severe, we call that tolerable stress. Tolerable stress might result from working on a project for 10 days in a row, maybe 10 hours a day, 10 days in a row, but then being able to take extra days off after the work is finished. Toxic stress on the right side of the screen here involves demands that are intense, prolonged, repeated, and unaddressed. So right now, many of our employees are experiencing intense, prolonged, and repeated stress. Eliyahu noted some of these stressors, but individuals may be challenged by working from home alongside children who are learning from home or doing online school. Or maybe a family member has gotten sick. They may be worried about the future and the current unknowns about the pandemic. How's it going to play out? Will I get furloughed again? If I get furloughed again, if I lose income again, will I survive? So the work of managing toxic stress is absolutely draining. We use more calories, we become worn down physically, we're more tired. Things that were easier are now harder. It's harder to get up in the morning, for example. It's harder to focus and it's harder to concentrate. So toxic stress profoundly impacts us, and it's important to understand how, and so I want to talk a little bit about the basic brain science around this and how this helps us understand how to respond. This image comes from Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a child psychiatrist and neuroscientist who really helps us understand the impact of stress and trauma on our bodies and our brains. So this inverted pyramid it depicts the organization of the brain in the simplest terms. By the way, the brain is the most complex structure we have on this planet. So this is a model that Bruce Perry has given to us, us who are not doctors, to be able to talk about it. So the brain mediates our thoughts, feelings, actions, and connections to others and the world. It is our central stress organizer, and it helps us understand what's stressful and what we should do about it. So it's organized from the bottom up. Our brain stem, the bottom part of the brain, comes online first, and we don't survive birth as human beings unless we have a functioning brain stem. It oversees our basic bodily functions such as body temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure. As we grow through early childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, our brain develops. And the frontal cortex, which is where our executive functioning is housed, where we can think abstractly, that comes online around the age of 27, so well into what we consider adulthood. So our stress response system is housed in our lower brain. All the information that we receive all day long, all the internal stimuli that we might feel, we're hungry, our bladder's filling up, or we've had some kind of thought that's causing us to worry, or any outside stimuli, something that's anything we're seeing, tasting, feeling, etc., comes through our lower brain, and it's there that we decide if we're threatened or safe. And if something makes us feel threatened, there are a variety of responses we can use to take care of ourselves, to stay safe, and we often reference those as the fight, flight, or freeze response. I'm guessing you're familiar with that. So I want to go through this chart. It's got a lot of words on it, but I find that it can be very helpful to explain how our brains and bodies are impacted by toxic stress. So all of our brain functions are related to our internal state, or how we internally feel. Are we feeling calm? Are we in a sense of alert? Are we now alarmed, afraid, or really terrified? Again, I noted all the stimuli that comes in. Every moment comes through our lower brain, and it's there that we determine if we're in danger and what we should do about it. So here, the internal state is calm, and the part of the brain that's in charge is helping us think abstractly. It's the neocortex. We're on the top part of that pyramid. We have two ways that we react, or two very simple, in a very simple fashion, I can note continuums that drive our behaviors, and that's the dissociative continuum. That's that mental mechanism in which we we're physically there, but we mentally leave, we psychologically leave. We can call that checking out. And the arousal continuum in which we get physically engaged, or we can call that acting out. And sense of time. So if we're calm, we're at rest in both continuums, and our sense of time is to the extended future. Now, something has come into our either internally or externally that's caused us to feel alert. And this is not bad. This is often how we're feeling when we're working. We're monitoring the environment, trying to sort out how we should respond. We may be thinking concretely. Our cortex is still in charge, but moving down a little bit in that inverted pyramid. We may become a little more avoidant if we're on the dissociative continuum, vigilant if on the arousal continuum, and thinking ahead only to days and hours. Now something's happened that's caused us to feel alarmed. We may be thinking emotionally. The part of the brain that's in charge is moving down to the limbic and the midbrain. We may become compliant if we're dissociating, crying if we're aroused, and switching to hours and minutes and how far ahead we can think. Then now something's happened in which we're pretty afraid. Where our cognitive thinking is reactive in nature. It's our midbrain that's in charge. If we're dissociating, we may have started to do some fetal rocking. If we're terrorized, if we're on this arousal continuum, we may have started to tantrum, and we can only think ahead to minutes and seconds. And then finally, something's happened in our external environment or internally that's caused us to be terrified. We can only think reflexively, have no control over our thoughts. Our brainstem is in charge. We may have fainted if we're on the dissociative continuum. We may have become aggressive if we're on the arousal continuum, and we cannot think ahead not even a couple seconds ahead. So in the context of this current environment, what we're knowing, and Eliyahu noted this, our baseline of stress, it has risen. We're experiencing more toxic stress, and many of us are hanging out instead of calm and alert, we're hanging out in the alarmed or fear territories, and maybe even experiencing moments of terror. And thus, we are struggling to do all the things that we do in our regular lives that we are expected to do, certainly in the work setting. We are struggling to respond, learn, and process in the ways that we're being asked to do. And of course, this helps us understand some of the behaviors that we've been seeing in this moment. So irrational hoarding of toilet paper is one example. Denial of the pandemic, callous behavior that we've seen, not understanding complexities related to the rationale for social distancing, and also challenges in having, well, the piece about systemic racism. I mean, we're often in our lower brain when we're working in those areas, and it's very challenging to have rational conversations that are productive. So when we understanding that our employees, for sure, ourselves included, are hanging out on the right side of the arousal continuum causes us to figure out what to do about it. I spend a lot of time working in the area of trauma-informed approaches, using a trauma-informed lens, and I wanted to share about this because it's incredibly relevant in this time. So a trauma-informed approach is an intervention we use at the organizational level that provides a pathway for responding to the wide scope of staff needs and customer needs during times of uncertainty, stress, and chaos. It helps us respond to stress, distress, and trauma, and it can help really lay a foundation for creating a positive workforce culture and advancing goals that we're really always hungry to achieve. It can help us learn how to manage conflict, nurture relationships, embrace equity, and achieve excellence. So I want to talk through these principles quickly. As it relates to safety, we know that right now people are really worried about their physical safety, and we have to pay attention to psychological safety as well. And so one of the many challenges ahead is ensuring all kinds of safety as people return to the workforce. Trauma-informed principles can help us do that. As it relates to trust and transparency, that's really critical in our organizations. It's not just, I wish we had trust on our teams. We have to have trust in our teams in order to be productive, in order to be innovative, in order to get our work done in the ways we really need to get it done. So trust is built through practice and through intentional relationship building. For example, as managers right now, we need to share as much information as possible with our staff, offer opportunities for processing hard information, understand that staff can handle that, and be transparent in our communications. Collaboration and mutuality, we're talking a lot these days in the workforce about increasing interpersonal skills, and that's for a reason, because when we learn how to relate with each other, we can get the work done in the way we need to get it done. So effective collaboration is incredibly important. Again, we need to partner with staff. We need to ask for their input. We need to listen to and consider solutions. And related to mutuality, we need to try to level the power differentials when we can. Not always possible, but whenever we can, to ensure that we're connecting with people as human beings. So how can we look for common experiences with staff outside of these current crises that can highlight a shared humanity? Empowerment, voice, and choice. In a resilient and thriving organization, everyone needs to feel supported and their voices heard. So we honor different ways of engaging in the work. I know there's been a lot of accommodations made and exceptions made, expectations examined because of the pandemic. That's an example of something we need to keep doing as we move forward. There are lots of lessons we've learned in this moment, and how, as Eliyahu noted, how can we take these lessons learned and make sure they're part of our policies, practices, and procedures going forward. And so as it relates to voice and choice, what are staff telling us about what they need, and how can we honor that? Peer support is about connecting in the workforce, making sure we're relying on each other and we're sharing experiences, we're expressing and living empathy with each other. So one possible strategy for building peer support is to create a buddy system that ensures no staff member is outside of the protective culture. And by the way, when you're doing that, make sure as managers that someone is also checking in on you, that you have your own buddy that's making sure you're doing okay. And then gender, historical, and cultural differences. You know, certainly as a white person, I can say that I have significant privilege. This moment requires me to understand it and to check it, to listen and learn as much as I can in this moment about both group cultures, but individual cultures, the individual cultures that our staff, that each individual has. We need to be curious about how this pandemic impacts people across all sectors and groups, about how systemic approaches to these crises impact marginalized populations. We need to make sure that we're listening to all voices as we're gathering solutions. So there are, so those are the overall principles that we hardwire into our policies, practices, and procedures. We can get down to specific strategies, and one of them is learning and teaching others how to regulate. A lot of the work related to understanding the brain and responding to toxic stress, and staying on the left of that chart, staying in the calm and alert, in the alert areas, is quieting our lower brain. There are many ways to do that, and regulating is one of them. So Dr. Perry again teaches us that there are 3 ways to regulate. There are 3 ways to calm our lower brain. One is from the top down. So if you remember the inverted pyramid, regulating using our frontal cortex, that part of the brain where we think. There's lots of different ways to do that. One of these is understanding the pause between that stimulus that comes in and how we respond. There is a pause, usually, unless we're on the terror side, then maybe not. But there's often an opportunity to stop and think and pause before we act. That's a form of regulation. Mindfulness is a type of meditation in which we focus on being intensely aware of what we're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment. Perhaps you're bringing mindfulness into the workforce. This is something that's becoming more and more relevant, especially in this moment. So I'm doing a mindful minute at the start of every meeting. Encouraging staff to practice a mindful minute maybe 5 times a day. as leaders, we can model that for staff and teach staff how to do that. And that helps to quiet the lower brain. Another strategy using our thinking brain is repeating core beliefs, such as this will not last forever, this too shall pass, etc. Second way to regulate is from the bottom up. So from that lower brain up, that lower part of the pyramid, rhythmic repetitive interventions, such as walking, focused breathing, music and dance. What we know right now is because we're in the middle from around alarm, fear, etc., we need to do this more often. So if you feel better by exercising in the morning, what you might find is that doesn't hold you all day. Sometime 2 hours after you're done exercising, you're going to start to feel unfocused again, or anxious, or revved up. So how do we quiet our lower brain? Take another walk, take a 10-minute break, do some focused breathing, etc. And thirdly, we regulate in context with other people. Relationships, we're hardwired for relationships. We heal within the context of relationships. We calm ourselves down and within the context of healthy, nurturing relationships. So in the work setting, as managers, and all of us need to focus on making sure we're feeling connected, making sure that people understand they belong, that their work is valued. And so we focus on relationships. It's been a little harder to do with this virtual work setting, but certainly people have figured it out, and virtually we've been able to stay in contact. And as we go back, how are we creating a positive work culture in which people feel connected? That's going to be a major focus of the work ahead. One final thing I want to say just to all of you and to everyone in your environments, in your work setting, is to practice self-compassion. This is hard work. We're all struggling right now in many different ways. So we're going to mess up. We're not going to do things as efficiently as we used to, etc. We're going to step in it, for example, have difficult conversations. And when that happens, it's important to practice self-compassion. Kristen Neff teaches us a lot about that. So I would encourage you to remember that you are doing the best you can. Everyone is doing the best we can. And to use that tenet in your work to guide your practices as you move forward. So thank you so much. That's my portion. And now I believe I'm going to turn it back to Eliyahu.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Karen. So now that we see how trauma needs to be responded to, let's take a look at a process for doing that. So right here, you're probably familiar with the survey from Gallup, the State of the American Workplace, came out in 2017. And cutting to the chase, you remember the figure that 67% of the workforce is either unengaged or actively disengaged. Like, 17% is actually hurting the organization. 51% is just a drag on the organization. They're just kind of there. Now, what's that about, and why does the CEO of Gallup say, well, the answer to that is a coaching culture? Wow. The upshot of engagement is that people don't have, they're not getting what they want. And so when I don't get what I want, yeah, I'll be here. I do want to collect my paycheck. I do want to do a good thing with my career. But, if it's not exactly really meeting my needs, I only put myself into it so much. So this suggestion to change right now the workplace, which came out in, a few years ago, into a coaching culture, meaning a culture where we ask questions, we find out about what our employees need. We try to elevate their individual needs and do it in a way that works for the organization. That means the organization's direction and processes needs to be a little bit more flexible, answerable not only to shareholders in case of the commercial interest, the board maybe in the case of a nonprofit, but also answerable to the employees, because employees are actually what makes everything go, right? So the way to do that is by listening. Really listening more, which goes right along with the trauma-informed lines. So what do employees want? What do they need? So in 2019, Gallup came out with this one. And after a wide survey, they found out that most people want to just enjoy their daily work. Just let me enjoy it. This is my life. I want to enjoy it. And it's not about, okay, I'm just going to do my job and I don't care. I work in order to live. No, I see my living as work. And now with people working from home, it's all the more tied in. My life and my work are all the more tied in together. And so I really need to enjoy my day, enjoy what I'm doing in my day. And if I'm just going to take out the things that say, level of pay, stable and predictable hours, which right now we can't deal with, right? But if we take out the money aspect, what we see is in enjoying the work, meaning having a manageable stress level and having good relationships and having a sense of purpose then gets highlighted. You see, having a sense of purpose, and then below that black area there, having the power to change things, career advancement opportunities, control, right? People want the sense of autonomy. They want the sense of, wait a minute, I got this. This is mine. Let me run forward with it, right? Which is all tied into relationship, because they want people to be listening and they want to be considered important. And if I'm not being listened to, obviously I'm not important. I'm just here as a resource, not as a human, as a resource. And there's the balance. So this is what's going on with people. So what do we do? 3 steps to transition staff. I haven't been in the military, but I must have somehow absorbed it because I love 3s. So here we go. Ask, consider, change. Very simple 3 steps. Ask employees what's going on, not just what's going on with your deliverables. How can I help? What resources do you need to get your deliverables done? But just what's going on. Make sure that that they know that they're seen as a person. And the way to do that is actually managers need to be vulnerable. Managers need to be human themselves. Because then the other person on the other side, the employee in this case, opens up, okay? And when I say managers, I also mean people on the executive team. It's true whatever level we're at. And this kind of starts just asking, just a culture of asking starts creating an organizational togetherness. We're in this together. So ask. Don't think just because you have a higher title, you know better. You probably do, but you're probably missing things too. And even if you're not, the process is the point, not the product, the process, in terms of helping relieve the mental and emotional stress and also increase engagement. So second step, consider what they said. It's not just a matter of, oh, okay, I heard you, let me go forward with my plan, obviously. I'll get into more detail in a second. And the third step is roll out those changes. You've considered what they've said. You've said, okay, we have resources for this, not for that. Other people want different things all together. Here's what we can do, but don't stop there. Then ask again. It's an iterative process. So ask again, and I'm talking both down and up. So it's communicating needs and possibilities and resources and limitations in both directions, and also side to side across silos. And then when people agree and are in this together, then the things that we can do are okay. For instance, after a certain amount of time, maybe those plexiglass holders that we're putting up in between cubicles have a different interpretation on them. Maybe people don't feel like it's a help and a safety. Maybe they feel like, wait, now I'm confined. So it needs to be iterative and keep going. So let's look into what we ask. So here's another 3, and the only other 3 I'll give you. So this is like the sum total of what I'm telling you here today. In each phase, ask, consider, and change, we ask about safety, agency, and sustainability. So asking all sorts of questions about what people need to feel safe and what the organization needs to feel safe, because it's kind of an abstract entity, but you got to figure the executives are going to represent that, and so are managers. So we need to hold both. And also agency. So what do people need in order to feel empowered? The psychological term is self-efficacy, to feel like, yes, I can. I can. I have this idea or I have this need, and even if I don't have an idea of how to address it, I'm going to state my need because I know that in this culture here, we have responsiveness coming up and it's safe to say something. I'm not just going to be told, buck up, tough luck. And if I am in the end told, buck up, tough luck, it will be because still within a process that we've had. And then this, this COVID moment here, this moment of transition and shock is, we could tend to come up with solutions that are good for the moment, but not necessarily sustainable long-term. So we want to make sure that things are sustainable. And then when we consider what we can do about it, it's taking the time to consider is really important. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction fixing little things. Let's fix things. That's one style of doing things, and it's good for the short term, not good for the long term. So we're going to bring as many people together in the consideration as possible, those who are in charge of resources in policy making. And then we can go back and roll it out and talk about, roll it out at all levels. So you see the HR person is right in the middle, bringing the organization to an in this together state. And then once we find out if we do X, is that going to create safety? Is that going to create a sense of agency? And will it be sustainable? Then we can implement. So that was a really quick run through. But I think it's just to summarize here, I think it's really clear. Ask, consider, change. And when you're doing each one of these, the content is about safety, agency, and sustainability. So that was a little rapid fire, but here we are. James is now going to talk about what to look for and how to respond at the individual level. So you've had the lens and why we need to do this, a process for communication, and now the communicative ability. So if you would, James, go right ahead.
Sure, and good morning, everybody. Before I share my screen, I just want to get a sense of familiarity with the mental health first aid program. Has anybody heard of the program? So either give me a physical thumbs up or a reaction thumbs up for those folks that are not on camera. Okay, so I'm seeing some of this. Okay. All right, so great. So I'm happy to introduce you all to what the program is all about as I go through some of these slides here. And again, give you some tools that you can use right away with some of the employees that may be struggling. So we're going to talk about those practical tools, what you may see, what you can say, what we can do when an employee, when a manager, whoever it might be, is struggling in the situation. And I just wanted to open up with a quote that came from McKinsey about this current time and thinking ahead to what are some things some companies should do in terms of reskilling their workforces. So to meet this challenge, companies should craft a talent strategy that develops employees' critical digital and cognitive capabilities, their social and emotional skills, and their adaptability and resilience. Developing this muscle will strengthen companies for future disruptions. And of course, I highlighted social and emotional, given that's, of course, what I'm going to talk about. But of course, social and emotional is also going to factor into, as my colleagues talked about, helping people with cognitive capabilities, helping people to deal with adapting to different situations, being resilient. So what is mental health first aid? So just a quick overview at the 20,000 foot level. It's a nationwide program. It's evidence-based. It actually originally started in Australia back in 2001, came to the US in 2008. It is an educational class that also has a certification attached to it. And lots of folks across the country, HR folks, teachers, police, many others are getting certified in the program. And in some cases, they're being mandated by state legislation to do so. If I was to ask you all how many people have taken physical first aid at some point in your life, many of you would be saying yes, right? But if you think about our daily life and life at work, it's pretty rare in which you have to use physical first aid tools. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's there for us if we need it. The reality is mental health first aid is probably something we're going to use more on a regular basis. Okay, we're not talking about necessarily someone dealing with a severe illness, though of course you can use these tools and skills for that. But when folks in our life are struggling with, as we're going through now, how can we support that person? How can we help that person return to productivity and return to their performance levels before? So when we look at mental health first aid, we're again looking at that same model that physical first aid has. Okay? It is an early intervention tool to help connect another adult who may be experiencing mental health or substance abuse challenge to appropriate support. So much like with physical first aid, with CPR, you learned the compressions, you had some practice, but then you handed it off to the EMTs when they arrived on the scene. It's the same thing with mental health first aid. So we have our initial piece, but then we hand off, okay? So we're gonna talk about how do you maintain those roles, how do you maintain those boundaries as a manager, as a employee, at the same time you're wanting to help people. Because a lot of times people worry, am I going to get in over my head? Am I going to be seen as a case manager for the person? Okay? And that's what this is not about. Okay? This is about giving people some tools and skills that you make the choice when and if you use them. This does not require you to intervene in any single situation. Okay? You're also covered under the Good Samaritan Act as you are with physical first aid. So we're going to talk about first the heart of the program, which is the action plan. And with physical first aid with CPR, you learned about the ABCs of CPR, airway, breathing, circulation. Of course, these days they teach it more as a CAB, compressions first, and then focusing on airway, breathing. But they gave you a memory device, an acronym, so you can think through, you can frame, how am I responding to what is going on? So with mental health first aid, we have something called ALG, not the green stuff on a pond, okay, different spelling. And what it stands for is the following: assess for risk of suicide or harm, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance and information, encourage appropriate professional help, and encourage self-help and other support strategies. That little guy there on the left, the koala, is also named Algae because the program did get started in Australia, so that is our mascot for the program. This action plan, again, is the heart of the program. And so, again, it helps us to frame, how do I help this person? Once I have seen something, when something has concerned me, what do I say to the person? What do I do? So it really helps you to make this as practical as possible. Now, with things like CAB of CPR, CAB, they want you to do it in a specific order. With mental health first aid, we have the flexibility to use it in whatever order we see fit. Some stuff we don't have to do, depending on the situation. Some stuff we're doing simultaneously. Okay? So there's a lot of fluidity, a lot of flexibility with this action plan itself. So let's first talk about roles and boundaries, because I'm sure that is on many of your minds as managers and as folks that work at HR. So one thing to keep in mind, when people learn mental health first aid, it's not about diagnosing, it's not about treating, it's not about becoming a therapist, okay? Again, same thing with physical first aid and CPR. We're going to leave that out. We're going to leave that to the professionals, okay? So we do give people tools and skills on what to look out for, what to notice, but not to connect the dots, okay? And again, a lot of the times we're noticing things that are impact on day-to-day life, particularly work performance. And of course, in these days and times, given that we're working, many people are still working remotely, it's hard to know what exactly is going on, right? Because we're not seeing a person throughout an entire day. So again, our role is to observe, notice changes. Based on that, reach out to the person, approach, assess the situation, and assist. And as needed, connect that person to an EAP or other types of resources. We always have to keep in mind, this goes back to what some of the things that Karen was talking about. We have to respect and honor, of course, privacy. Again, as HR folks or managers, you're well aware of that, but absolutely someone's culture. And again, not making assumptions about someone's culture, but just seeing what is comfortable for that individual. And of course, this is a big one for you all. Mental health first aid never supersedes any of your policies, protocols, all that, okay? So you always have to follow that, and you just fit in mental health first aid as need be. And again, with physical first aid, with mental health first aid, we have to ensure safety first for everybody involved in any situation. And again, as Karen mentioned, we have to take care of ourselves too, because much like we talked about, way back when if we were flying a lot around the country, they would talk about the oxygen mask fall. We need to put it on ourselves first before to help someone else. So to be able to reach out and to connect with someone and to help them, assist them, we have to be helping ourselves, because if we don't have anything to give, we can't really give that to someone else. So we talk about that in the program as well. But what I really want to get into first is the what we may see, and then we'll talk about what do we say and do. So what I've compiled here are some signs and symptoms that may relate to someone potentially dealing with anxiety or depression, but again, we don't diagnose, because some of the things you're going to see up here are just things we're all feeling right now during COVID, and it does not necessarily mean we have a disorder. Some of the things you may see up here may be connected to a whole other health issue, another reason we want to diagnose, and some things may be connected just to someone's culture. So we want to be aware of these things, but not go to the point of diagnosing. So our first category is physical, and this just helps us to keep in mind that mental health first aid, mental health and mental health challenges are whole body issues. They're not just things that are up here. We'll get to that next, but these are whole body issues. They impact us in so many different ways, as you see there. So with an employee that you're talking with over Zoom or whatever it might be, you may notice a decline in some self-care, okay? Now, of course, a lot of us are dressing down a little bit more, right, as we go on some of these calls. But again, if it is a change for the person, as excessive change, we may be concerned, okay? Someone may be more fidgety than they used to be. So there can be, again, a number of physical changes to the body going on. When it comes to cognitive or emotional, there may be more indecisiveness or confusion, right? Someone may be criticizing themselves or criticizing others. And again, that is new and different for that person. So as managers, you have a sense of people's baselines and how are we noticing some changes from those original baselines. Again, keeping in mind the times that we're living in now and some of that, but is it going more to extreme? Is it going more towards excessiveness? And of course, it comes out in behaviors, many of these things. Okay? Now, of course, there's always that balance. What is social distance versus isolation and withdrawal? Okay, so we're all have some of those elements going on, but are we seeing an impact on someone's day-to-day functioning, on their typical way of being, on their personality? Again, we want to be aware of these things, but don't want to go to the point of diagnosing, because that is not our role. So I want to throw out a case scenario, something that you may be facing or may face, and talk about what are some of the things we see, and then how do we respond to this person. All right, so I know you all can read, but of course I'll just read it out loud in case people are away from the screen at the moment. So this is for Tracy, and I'm just keeping this not necessarily any gender. Tracy has been with the organization for a few years and is a real go-getter, requiring little day-to-day supervision. When the office went remote, Tracy adjusted pretty quickly to the transition, brought the same quality, energy to the work while caring for two young kids at home. Over the last 2 months, you have noticed a dip in work productivity, has been unusually silent in Zoom meetings, emailed the wrong proposal to a client, and missed a key deadline. So obviously there are a number of things of concern, right? Both as a manager, but also as someone that cares about another person that you've been working with for a while. And so we have seen something, we've noticed something, we're getting that little, something's going on here, right? How do I engage this person? How do I approach this person with these concerns? Because some of these things, of course, have to be addressed related to work performance. So of course that brings us back to our action plan. And again, the first part, assess, is also about approaching the person. What's the best approach for this particular person in this situation. And then of course we talk about a little bit about assessing. Listen and give really go together, two sides of the same coin, right? How do we listen? How do we be mindful of our own assumptions? And at the same time, how do we give reassurance? And we'll talk about some things related to that. And then the two E's, which has to do with next steps, right? If this goes beyond my role as a manager, as a mental health first aider, how do I take that next step and encourage that person to seek additional resources? So briefly, just some considerations, and then we'll talk more specifically about how do we help Tracy in particular. So again, I'm just going to repeat it. I'm sure it's top of your mind as well too. Follow those policies and procedures, right? And then fit in these pieces that we'll talk about. Consider your relationship to the person. Of course, if we are more of a colleague / friend, it's going to be a little easier in some way, right? But if this is a supervisor to a supervisee, of course, we need to be aware of that, because the person's going to be wondering, is this going to affect my job? Is this going to affect my employment? Is this going to affect any bonuses? So, of course, it just gives a different dynamic. What is the timing of that conversation? And how do I include work performance concerns? We want to limit our conversations to our observations and omit hearsay. So hearing things secondhand, thirdhand. Again, not diagnosing, not asking about specific health conditions. I'm sure that's very familiar to you all, right? Not getting into HIPAA and other privacy issues. All right, this is a big one. We always have to be mindful. We all have biases. We all have assumptions. We all make judgments. But we have to be mindful of them coming from here through our mouth to the person, right? And how do we just first be aware of it, and how do we be really thoughtful about what we're saying to the person? And then one big thing to keep in mind, just because we're listening, just because we're giving some reassurance, does not mean that we are agreeing with that person's perspective on the events. All right, so let's talk more specifically to Tracy. I'm going to bring up some things that are not helpful. You may have heard some of these things in your time, in your day. So, Tracy, please stay on after the team Zoom to talk with me, right? In public, that's not respecting the individual. You are not performing anymore, right? That may be true, but is that the best way to get at it, since we want to help this person get back to their previous potential? I'm going to have to write you up, which may be the case, but maybe that's not the first thing that's coming out of our mouth. This is all about building trust and rapport, right? And what is going to get in the way of trust rapport? What is going to help to build it? So we still have to get at some of these issues, but again, it may not be some of the first things out of our mouth. According to your teammates, right? So we're doing that secondhand thing. What happened to you? Even in a joking way, is just going to put someone on the defensive. I don't want to hear excuses. I just need you to get the work done. Right? So the latter may be true, right? But we have to think about how do we express these things. And of course, each person's going to be a little different. I completely understand what you're going through, okay? We can never completely understand what another person is going through. Even though we're all going through this pandemic at the same time, we're all having very different reactions, as my colleagues talked about. Figure things out. I don't want to see anything happen to you here, right? Bringing fear into the equation. Don't get upset. So telling a person how they should feel. It sounds like you're depressed. That's diagnosing someone, okay? You really need to talk to a counselor about that stuff. All right, so let's talk about really what is helpful to change up some of these things that we just looked at. Okay, so I'm gonna just show these up and have you all look at them, but these speak more to empowering the person, right? They speak more to just sharing things from our own perspective. Yes, we need to bring up performance issues, but sometimes we need to talk about that we're going to put them aside for the moment because I just want to check in with you as a person, as an individual. Okay? So we're not getting rid of it, but we're putting it aside for the moment. How can I help? There's some reassurance like this is such a challenging time. It's understandable to feel stressed. And again, at the end, if necessary, if you feel like it's beyond your role, have you considered utilizing EAP and being really knowledgeable if one exists, or be knowledgeable about whatever resources are around what can you offer that person? So you have a sense of it so that you can really share. As you all know, EAPs tend to be very underutilized, though in this day and age, they may be much more utilized. I haven't seen some of those statistics. But again, it's just us being aware of that and sharing that information. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Eliyahu so we can make sure that we have time for questions.
All right, thank you, James. Let's perhaps move to, I'm gonna just share this little screen, make it clear, Q&A. I know this was very rapid. If you have questions, let's see them. Just unmute yourself, or let's hear them. Just unmute yourself and ask away.
Or put it in the chat. We'll monitor that as well.
Okay. Yeah, if you could. I can't see the chat at the moment. Anything bad happened?
Well, Eliyahu, this is Michael. Put a rather long thing in the chat. Excellent presentation, really appreciated. And I don't want to go word for word with what I put in the chat, but some of the questions I have, and there are a bunch of them, are how does this, you know, in the tax exempt community, quote unquote, our employees are often volunteers. How does this relate to how we deal with volunteers and who may also be experiencing many of the things that you've mentioned here today, as well as the interaction between those volunteers and the staff, and so forth and so on. And also, I'd like to hear more specificity about the issues associated with those whose work location is at home versus those who are in the office, some hybrid form. You know, we're going through some change here. What's that going to mean to us? I heard this as a small indictment, if you would, of some of the current EPA efforts. And lastly, I guess, is, well, two things. Do we really need to rethink the policies that we currently have in terms of employee expectations, in terms of job descriptions, in terms of training for managers and employees? I know that's a lot, but you also provided a lot.
It's fine. That's we can do this. It's good. No, Michael, thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to respond first. If Karen or James need to say anything, go ahead. So like this. Number one, let me just say that from what I can tell from the different HR groups that I've been attending, employees aren't so quick to actually want to come back right now. So maybe political guidelines are, go ahead, open up, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And maybe employers are saying, okay, come on back, we're ready. Employees are not so fast. I've been working this out here at home. And so reaching out is going to have to happen, whether it's in tax exempt or status or not. So even if I have volunteers, the question is, are they important to me? Are they important to the organization and the functioning of the organization? They're still going to have the same tensions. And so active reaching out is still important, and doing it in the way that James and Karen were talking about. That was my 61-second answer.
Yeah, and as far as volunteers, I think a lot of the same things that we're talking about still apply for folks that are volunteers. Of course, got to maintain all those procedures that they agreed to with being volunteers, but everything we talked about reaching out to folks that are struggling still applies to them as well too.
And I'll just note this, Karen, that the policies, practices, and procedures are relevant in that we know so much more now about how individuals are impacted by the events in their lives, these current events, past events, et cetera, and how that impacts their ability to perform, to do the things that we want them to do. And so how do our policies acknowledge that? How do we create environments in which people can have difficult conversations, apologize, make mistakes, receive help without any kind of ramifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it does warrant looking at our policies, practices, and procedures through that lens, to the extent that we can. As we're moving, it's an evolution. We make changes over time. But
if any of you need to drop off right at the moment, we did say 9 to 10 o'clock. Please feel free. You have our contact information there if you want to follow up in any way. Otherwise, I'm going to say let's keep going till about 5 after, another few minutes. So I can't see the chat. If somebody else popped up another question, go ahead. Otherwise, Michael, what's missing from our answer?
Well, no, I don't think there's anything missing. I think, I really would be interested on the issue of policy revamping, and I would be interested. I guess the algae program would be a kind of training piece for managers and employees that might be valuable. So those are I think good suggestions. I'm not as I don't think we've handled the volunteer issue as well because of all the eccentricities that go with this idea of volunteers and actual employees and what controls we have or don't have, associated with those individuals. But it's a very thoughtful presentation, very.
And one of the things,
Michael, one thing I was going to just briefly mention is the mental health first aid program is going virtual. And what sometimes some groups will do is part of an orientation session, whether they are going into as an employee or as a volunteer, have people learn some of these skills because given their work as a volunteer, they may be addressing these issues with the folks that they are helping. And it, of course, is just helpful for ourselves as well,
Sure.
too.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
And you can also have you can facilitate for your organizations. You can facilitate a conversation just specifically, a Zoom, just specifically for volunteers and find out, okay, what are your needs? How is this impacting you? Or you feel like you're connecting as you had connected before? Do you feel more empowered, more disempowered? What do you need? The whole point is just ask to hear.
Eliyahu, the question in the chat was having to do with will the recording be sent to participants? Will they have?
It will. Assuming a link will be sent.
Okay.
Just anyone who came in after I was speaking, sorry, you're going to miss mine because I didn't hit the record button until Karen started speaking. So just
in case.
Yeah. Exactly. And also we're going to follow up with some collateral pieces too. Exactly technically how, I hope to get the email out today. So I'm just going to stop it here. And if there are any unanswered questions, you can contact us. If they're in the chat, we'll respond by email. Thank you very much for participating, and go ask, listen, and love. Take care.